Hello, this is Suki Deep Dog. It means to read deeply with Suki. Today's book is Hankang's The Vegetarian. Was it hard for Hankang's The Vegetarian to understand? Then let's analyze it together with Suki Deep Dog. The central theme of Hankang's The Vegetarian is the violence inherent in a male-dominated patriarchal society. Young's father is serving its symbolic figure of the violence. The most basic unit of patriarchal society is the family centered around the father. However, in a patriarchal society, love between a man and woman is not considered a particularly important element of marriage. Marriage, under various reasonable purposes and justification, is carried out like a rite of passage once one reaches a certain age. That's why among the 4 characters in this novel, not a single one gets married out of love. Its highest priority is the maintenance of social order. Therefore, it governs its members through laws and norm and discipline, demanding sacrifice and obedience. Because the values of society take precedence over individual worth, personal self-expression and freedom are repressed. And because power is concentrated in one place, it's inevitably accompanied by violence. Within such a violent and repressive structure, how can the individual care for their own existence? Through this novel, Hankang poses this question to us. In the midst of such a repressive and violent structure, is our life truly okay? What kind of reality do we face when we fail to care for our own being? In this novel, Hankang presents 4 different cases, allowing us to reflect on which character we must closely relate to. Before analyzing these 4 cases, let's first examine Hankang's IRS model. This is because the novel incorporates several of Hankang's key concepts such as breasts, dreams, boundaries, incest, and jouissance throughout its narrative. Hankang is a psychoanalyst and a disciple of Freud. If Freud has either ego and superego, Hankang has the imaginary, the real, and the symbolic. Hankang's IRS model. I means the imaginary. The imaginary is the way a newborn baby perceives the world. Since the baby has not yet learned the language, he perceives the world through images. The baby believes that only he and his mother as the world exist and perceives him and his mother as an unified and undivided being. So the baby believes that only he exists in the world. So it's a world where all the desires he imagines and conceives are fulfilled and satisfied. R means the real. The real is the realm of what can be expressed through language. A world of what has been excluded, repressed, or lost from the world of language. It's a place like a reservoir of desire. It's the world where the true essence of things resides. The real exists within me, yet I remain unaware of it. It's something that moves me regardless of my consciousness. The real always stands beside us, staring us down. It commands us to listen closely to what we truly desire, and it urges us to desire our own desire. S means the symbolic. The symbolic is quite literally the world of language. Therefore, the true master of the symbolic is not the self, but language itself. And language always presupposes the presence of the other. The subject of the symbolic is formed through the gaze and directives of the other. As a result, the subject surrenders its agency to the other, constantly aware of the gaze of the other and endlessly craving the other's recognition. In the symbolic, the big other, represented by language and social order system, the state, society, or father, monitors me through laws and norms, urging me to do my best. This influences the formation of ideal self, and the demands and expectations of the big other become internalized as ideas that I strive to follow and embody. Can you distinguish between three dimensions, the imaginary, the symbolic, and the real? In the imaginary, only I exist in the world. There is no other. It is the world where all the desire I imagine and conceive are fulfilled. And I believe that what I want is what the world wants as well. A representative figure fixated in the imaginary is Hitler. The symbolic is filled with the gaze of the other, and there are a lot of norms that I have to obey. So the subject of the symbolic are prone to losing themselves and desires the desires of the other. And the real constantly urges us to desire our own desire. When these three dimensions shift between one another depending on the situation and are harmoniously interwoven, we can lead a healthy social life as mentally stable individuals. Then let's analyze each of the four characters one by one. First, let's take a look at the case of Young's husband in The Vegetarian. Do you think Young's husband is mentally well-being? No. Which dimension is dominant to him? The symbolic. Young's husband focuses all judgment criteria on the gaze of the other. He is conscious of others and habitually leads their feelings. Let's look at the page 22. Feigning composure, I registered curiosity, astonishment, and contempt which were revealed in turn in her eyes. He doesn't let his wife have a medical consultation because he is afraid of the gaze of the other. Look at the page 18. Even given the extreme unpredictability of her condition, I wasn't prepared to consider taking her of an urgent medical consultation, much less course of treatment. What kind of person do you think he is? Is his values or taste important to him, who put all his judgment criteria in the gaze of the other? No, his values and tastes do not matter to him. The only thing that matters to him is what they think. So he doesn't even know his values and tastes. That's why he lacks self-understanding. The lack of self-understanding leads to the loss of the subject. The loss of subject leads to the loss of empathy and communication. So he doesn't empathize with his wife's agony. He knew his wife's condition very well. Look at page 15. She grew thinner by the day. And the page 16. But I was convinced that there was more going on here than a simple case of vegetarianism. No, it had to be that dream she'd mentioned. He knew it's because of dreams, but he never inquired about it. Look at page 17. I never inquired as to the nature of this dream. Any compares like this, look at page 19. This strange situation had nothing to do with me. So he can't even solve the problem because he can't empathize with his wife's agony. When he faces problems, he just passes the problems on to his mother-in-law or sister-in-law. And ultimately, deciding he can't handle it himself, all he can do is demand a divorce, as if throwing away a broken appliance. If he had been a mentally healthy person, how might he have dealt with such a problem? A mentally healthy person doesn't completely surrender his subject to the other by constantly asking the question of who he is. Therefore, when he faces such a problem, he'll begin doing what he can do to understand his wife's condition. He will first engage in open and honest conversation and try to empathize with her agony. And if necessary, he will make an effort to resolve the problems together through medical consultation. The loss of something means the loss of empathy and the loss of ability to solve problems. What about us? The case of Young's husband questions us. Isn't it then you pay more attention to the gaze of the other than your own values and tastes, and can't take care of yourself properly? Second, let's examine the Ines case in framing trees. Which dimension is dominant to her? The symbolic. By the way, both Younghae's husband and In-hae are strongly influenced by the symbolic, but their behaviors are totally different. What is the difference between them? Younghae's husband is totally surrendered his subject to the gaze of the other, living cautiously and trying not to stand out. Look at the page 4. I always inclined towards the middle course in life. And later, I chose which college to apply to based on my chances of obtaining a scholarship large enough for my needs. Ultimately, I settled for a job where I would be provided with a decent monthly salary in return for diligently carrying out my allotted task at a company whose small size meant they would value my unremarkable skills. And so, it was only natural that I would marry the most run-of-the-mill woman in the world. Like this, he doesn't do his best. He wants to live in a normal way, trying not to stand out. But in his case, she does do her best to live a successful life. And In-hae internalized the demands and expectations of Big Other and strive to live a life devoted to realizing the ideals of society with patience and sincerity. We think she is great and she deserves to be a model of society. But do we want to live like her? No, we don't want to live like her even though she has these great virtues. Why not? From now on, let's figure out the reason one by one. In-hae internalized the expectation and demands of the Big Other and strive to realizing the ideals, producing a docile body subordinate to the disciplinary power. Here's a look at Foucault's Discipline and Punish to learn about disciplinary power. Foucault's Discipline and Punish. Discipline and Punish explains how prior to modern era, serious criminals were punished through corporal punishment. But after modern era, imprisonment became the dominant form of punishment. He explores how power and the interests of society play a role behind this shift. This change was because of Industrial Revolution, when urban population growth led to an increased emphasis on efficiency. The prison came to function as a space of control and surveillance, built upon various systems of discipline and regulation. This became a testing ground for how power could more effectively control the masses. This helped establish efficient systems within various social institutions. Disciplinary power is embedded within various institutions, and as individuals are educated and grown up, they begin to act according to the discipline they have internalized. As a result, modern society has become a society of self-discipline, one in which individuals monitor and control themselves. Disciplinary power operates through self-regulation, surveillance, and normalization, leading individuals to internalize this power and produce docile bodies. Let's take a look at the page 61. Was he a normal human being? More than that, a moral human being? A strong human being, able to control his own impulses? We often ask ourselves questions like this everyday life. These questions are proof that we live in a self-regulated society. Look at the page 63. Her eyes were deep and clear, framed by naturally double eyelids. This sentence is slightly different with the original text. In the original text, it states that in her early 20s, In-hae underwent double eyelid surgery, which gave her eye deeper and clearer appearance. The double eyelid surgery is symbolic, in action of adjusting the beauty standard to others. So I think the word double eyelid surgery in the original text is an important word. Look at the page 63. This page is important. And yet, right from the first, there had been something about her that left him feeling vaguely dissatisfied. Her face figure and thoughtful nature all combined to form the fitting image of the woman he had spent so long trying to find. And so, unable to put his finger on just what it was that he felt she was lacking, he'd made up his mind to marry her. In fact, it was only when he was introduced to her sister that he realized what it was his new wife was missing. Everything about her sister pleased him. Her single-lidded eyes, the way she spoke, so blunt as to be almost uncouth, and without his wife's faintly nasal inflection. Her drab cloth, her androgynously protruding cheekbones. She might well be called ugly in comparison with his wife, but to him she radiated energy. Like a tree that grows in the wilderness, denuded and solitary. Inez double-iris surgery and nasally inflected voice symbolize the docile body produced by disciplinary power. On the page 27, it says that her voice over the phone never failed to send me into state of sexual arousal. Something Inez's husband felt was lacking in his new wife is precisely what we are losing. Its raw, untamed energy like a tree that grows in the wilderness. We have lost such energy in compliance with social norms, producing docile bodies. The problem is that a docile body monitors and controls itself, depriving freedom and repressing self-expression, and ultimately losing its subject. In the end, people become a person who no longer knows what they truly want. Ine didn't realize how exhausted she truly was. Disciplinary power isn't coercively exerted on us, but secretly internalized. So we mistake it as our own desire. Look at the page 161. A time which she so far managed to get through only by using up every last reserve of perseverance and consideration. All of it self-inflicted. Like this, Ine mistook everything she had chosen as her own desire. Was it a life that she did her best to succeed? Look at the page 165. She took one more look round at the various objects inside the house. They did not belong to her, just like her life had never belonged to her. Her life was no more than a ghostly pageant of exhausted endurance, no more real than a television drama. And look at the page 162. The feeling that she had never really lived in this world caught her by surprise. It was a fact. She had never lived, even as a child, as far back as she could remember. She had done nothing but endure. Like this, she was an inauthentic being who had never lived her own life. In order to understand how a being that lives an inauthentic life comes to become aware of its own existence, then let's look at the Heidegger's being and time. Heidegger's being and time. Dasein lives an inauthentic life. Inauthentic life does not recognize the possibility of a human being. Inauthentic life lives passively in social norms or in the expectation of the other, and Dasein is entirely dependent on the world. It is meaningful and valuable to him, and he feels as comfortable and familiar as a home. However, Dasein is a being toward death and comes to an awareness of its temporality. Awareness of temporality causes anxiety. In that anxiety, everything changes. The world that has withdrawn suddenly loses its values and appears merely strange and unfamiliar. Anxiety makes him distinguish and becomes aware of the separation between self and the world. A being toward death becomes aware of his existence through anxiety. Look at the page 161. April, 2 years ago, Ine had bled from her vagina for across on a month, on and off. If it was a serious disease, how much time might she have left? A year, 6 months, or 3 months? And look at the page 165. Death, who now stood by her side, was as familiar to her as a family member missing for a long time but now returned. Like this, Ine as a being toward death becomes aware of temporality. And look at the page 154, 155, and 160. Time passes. And the page 166. Time passes. And 170. Time passes. These pages visually represent her awareness of temporality and symbolically reveal her anxiety as a being toward death. Like this, in her anxiety, the world so meaningful and familiar has become meaningless. Look at the page 165. All of this is meaningless. I can't take it anymore. I can't go on any longer. I don't want to. When Ine, as a being toward death, becomes aware of temporality, all the things that once felt so familiar and meaningful have lost their meaning. And then she realized that the time she thought she had chosen was never truly for her, and that she had been dead inside for a being. Now we can imagine that her life will change because she has come to realization the truth. At the least, we can be fairly certain that she will no longer continue living a life that feels dead inside. Now we can guess that she will live a life listening to what she wants. Third, let's examine the case of Ine's husband in Mongolian Mark. He is a video artist living in a world of images where the imaginary operates strongly. Artists evoke our lacks, repress the desire and the truth of the real through imagination. But his imagination can never achieve ultimate fulfillment on its own, because artists also live in the symbolic. They shouldn't cross the boundaries set by the symbolic. The moment someone crosses boundaries, harsh punishments await. When the imagination that has been summoned undergoes a process of sublimation, it transforms into art. Such an art expands the limit of our perception and liberates us from lack and desire. At that moment, we come to perceive the work as beautiful. Through the entire process, artists are also to release their repressed desires. That's why artists often seem to possess freer spirit than the rest of us. Do you think Ine's husband was able to confront and liberate his desires through the process of artistic creation? Perhaps not. The work he had done neither have liberated his repressed desires, nor been enough to fill his lack. Do you remember what his nickname is? Look at page 109. Your nickname used to be the May Priest. In this part, in the original text, it's emphasized like this: the May Priest, conscientious priest, upright priest. Skidip-dog thinks his nickname is very important because Skidip-dog analyzes that his nickname is a symbolic term that reflects how he repressed his desire throughout his life and art. Skidip-dog links his nickname to a false consciousness. Here is another difference from the original text. The translation associates the May with the Gwangju uprising in May and inserted the character as a survival of the May massacre into the work. However, the original text does not mention it at all. When you think about his nickname, the May Priest he got through his work, perhaps it may serve to further repress his desires. Just when he had grown weary of his work he had been doing for the past 10 years, he heard from his wife Ine about Mongolian Mark of Yonghae. Mongolian Mark called to mind something ancient, something pre-evolutionary, and stimulated his artistic inspiration. And Yonghae's presence came to occupy the place of the ideal being who completed his artistic inspiration. He strived everywhere to embody the images. Let's look at page 60. He spent a long time searching for a solution, for a way to free himself from the hold this image had on him. but nothing else would do as a substitute. He spent hours seemingly lost in a daydream, mulling over how to make the image become a reality. Was his artistic inspiration truly fulfilled? In my opinion, yes. He had completed the image he longed to embody. Look at the page 99. The previous afternoon, when he'd shown Jay the tape, the younger man had been incredibly excited. I can't believe it. It's magical. I mean, how did this sort of idea come to you in the first place? This is so different from anything you've made before. It's like something's lifted you right up to a completely different level. These colors. In this part, in the original text, something's lifted is stated as giant lifted. Skidip thinks the word giant is a very important word because it is a metaphor made famous by Newton. When people asked Newton, "How are you so genius?" he famously replied, "I was able to do so because I was standing on the shoulder of a giant named Descartes." Here the word giant came to symbolize genius. Inez's husband had entered the realm of genius. He felt it himself too. Let's look at the page 84. It was a feeling that stimulated something deep in his very core, passing through his like a continuous electric shock. He was completely drenched with sweat. The sweat is really sacred. And the result of sweat is like this. Look at the page 85. The body eliminated all desires was beautiful. And look at the page 88. He felt a thrilling energy in the process of realizing the image. In this part also, in the original text, it states that he felt a thrilling energy he had never once experienced in his 40 years. Based on these things, Skidip thinks his artistic inspiration had been fulfilled. So Skidip guesses what he was pursuing was not his artistic achievement. What did he want to gain by giving up all of his 40 or so years of life? What was it that couldn't even be filled with a thrilling energy and a feeling hit by an electric shock? Look at the page 66. As he watched her unconscious form receive emergency medical treatment, he'd heard a sound like something snapping inside his own body. What is that snapping sound? It is the sound that repressed desire was snapped and escaped from inside his body. The return of repressed desire is very strong. Look at the page 67. During the journey, he had felt suddenly sick. The sudden sickness recalls Hankang's existential sickness in Sartre's nausea. It's no shape, no clear quality, but it's undeniably something real. It's a symptom that body produced. When he confronted the desire repressed within his consciousness, felt with the whole of his being. And there was also the moment that he shed the image of the May priest. And from then on, he began to spiral out of control in pursuit of an ultimate fulfillment that must forever be deferred. Look at the page 68. At that moment, his thoughts crossed the boundary. Let's look at the Hankang's Juisans to see where this impulsive force comes from. Hankang's key concept Juisans. The big other of the symbolic represses private pleasure by laws and norms. As a result, the subject of the symbolic becomes a being of lack. Although we constantly try to fulfill our self-desire, desire is never fully satisfied and always leaves behind a sense of dissatisfaction. Juisans arises from the attempt to go beyond this lack in the pursuit of desire. However, Juisans demands an experience beyond limits. It seeks to transgress boundaries and prohibition. Juisans is an excessive drive that pushes beyond the limits, bombarding us with impossible demands. It is a violent intrusion, an implicit desire to overturn the reality principle, and brings a suffering that exceeds ordinary pleasure. Look at the page 96. He knew he had reached the point of no return, but he couldn't stop now. No, he didn't want to stop. And look at the page 89. He hesitated. He'd promised himself he wouldn't do this. He couldn't stop himself taking a close-up of her face. This moment marked his abandonment of the artistic achievement that has granted him entry into the world of genius. It's also the moment he destroyed the being of Young-hae. In the end, he broke the taboo, incest, and pushed beyond the limit of pleasure. Eventually, it destroyed everything he had built for his 40 years, and his art descended into porno. Look at the page 104. You want to make some kind of porno? Look at the page 105. It's miserable. And look at the page 118. The trace of his saliva and semen. His art was tainted with the saliva and semen, eventually left us with only extreme displeasure. His desire, long repressed and trapped within the image of the May priest, was unleashed through Young-hae's blood, and it made an impossible demand for him. All that is repressed inevitably erupts. Repression is dangerous and precarious in this way. And then it leaves us with a question. Was he insane or in a rational state of mind at that moment? Was he an artist or nothing more than a rapist? The symbolic judges it strictly. Look at the page 106. When he tugged her jeans down to her knees, she said no. It wasn't just verbally that she rejected him. She shoved him away roughly. Like this, she showed her refusal actively with saying no. And look at the page 138. Her husband had been held in a police cell after the hospital confirmed that he wasn't mentally ill. Like this, the other of the symbolic judges strictly, he's just a rapist who raped his sister-in-law. He had lived by concealing and distorting his own desire by his false consciousness. Juisangs urges us to dream of liberation from our suppressed desires. Aren't we obsessed with false consciousness? We don't know whether we are or not. What is our false consciousness that makes us unable to see ourselves properly? And let's ask who you are and take care of your inner persona. We should harmonize the inner persona with the outer persona to maintain a healthy well-being. Lastly, let's examine the Young-hae's case. Young-hae is the main character of The Vegetarian, but she is indirectly stated in the gaze of the other. This novel is structurally represented. We are surrounded by the gaze of the other like her. Young-hae is a being radiating energy like a tree that grows in the wilderness. This contrasts with the docile body produced by disciplinary power. This can be seen symbolically in her novra. Brazier is a kind of tool in which male-dominated patriarchal society controls and represses women. And the violent killing of the dog that beat the big man's daughter shows symbolically the murder and violence inherent in the patriarchal social order. Young-hae cut her finger while cutting the frozen meat. The red blood from her finger stimulated the trauma deep inside her unconsciousness. Since then, she had dreamed. In her dream, she witnessed the murder and violence inherent in her. Look at the page 32. Dreams of my hands around someone's throat, throttling them, grabbing the swing's ends of their long hair and hawking it all off. A pigeon still colors in the street, and my reserve filters, my fingers flashing to kill. Next look at it bright tormenting eyes, my fingers that could squeeze that brightness out. And page 33. Saliva pooling in my mouth, the butcher shop, and I have to clamp my hands over my mouth. Along the length of my tongue to my lips, slick with the saliva. Leaking out between my lips, trickling down. Through these dreams, she realized that the countless lives she had eaten, the carnivore, was infused with murder and violence. So she suffered from guilt. She thought the only way out of guilt is to refuse to eat meat. But a patriarchal society where the predator's principle works strongly gives great meaning to her shocking act of refusal to eat meat. Look at the page 23. Meat eating is a fundamental human instinct, which means vegetarianism goes against human nature, right? It just isn't natural. And look at page 24. I'd hate to share a meal with someone who considers eating meat repulsive, just because that's how they themselves personally feel, don't you agree? In this way, they think her refusal to eat meat as a challenge to the patriarchal social order and further represses her. So the father violently and desperately stops her refusal to eat meat. However, her repressed subject has been released and her returning subject can no longer be confined. After being released from repression, her subject is about to return to the origin of life. Thus, she seeks to become a plant in order to live as a being of desireless and non-violence. Furthermore, she makes a conscious resolution she resolves to become a tree. A being that sinks its roots deeper into the earth than any plant. A being that lives only by water and sunlight, harming no one. But it's not merely sufficient for her to become a tree. Through a dream, she realized that suffering she had imposed on others was the very suffering she had imposed upon herself. Thus, she realized the fact that the inflictor and the afflicted, the killer and the killed are ultimately one. Look at the page 28. Murderer or murdered, hazy distinction, boundaries wearing thin. Murderer or murdered, experience too vivid to not be real. Like this, she came to realize she was the one who had caused the suffering and that the suffering was ultimately directed toward herself. So she came to make a conscious resolution to take upon herself the suffering of the entire world. She thought the way to take upon herself the suffering of the entire world is through doing a handstand. In this way, by doing a handstand, she chooses the path of the savior of suffering. Look at the page 181. In that case, would the blood that Younghae had vomited today have burst from her in his chest instead? All of this was a result of her conscious resolution. Look at the page 172 and 173. It isn't that she is not conscious exactly. Later, it's as if her conscious mind is so completely concentrated on something or somewhere. The doctor was right. Younghae is definitely conscious. In this way, Younghae's silent resistance was an active and conscious resolution. With a conscious fully awake, Younghae became the surrogate of suffering. Shouldn't society or family respect her vegetarianism as a personal choice? In the story, no one asked her why she refused to eat meat. She wanted to keep speaking, I dreamed. She wanted to be understood, but no one asked about her dream. Neither her husband nor Ine, who poses as guardian, nor even the doctor asked about Younghae's dream. We set the framework for common sense that society is the norm. When a member tries to break the frame, it tries to put the member in the frame with repression and violence. The family in a patriarchal society is the most fundamental unit for producing docile bodies subjected to disciplinary power. The family serves as the frontline surveillance mechanism, monitoring and judging whether its member is normal or not. Thus, in the moment of a crisis, the family becomes the most violent and repressive force. The family is the first to cast out those who cross the boundaries. The moment signs of abnormality are detected within the family, love based on understanding and empathy disappears. It is replaced instead by violence and repression. This violently represses Younghae as if everything would return to normal, if only Younghae gave up her refusal to admit. And then, if no longer persuaded, they are the first to push out the boundary. This is also the central theme of Kafka's The Metamorphosis. That's all for Skidipdog's analysis of The Vegetarian. Next time, we will be back with Bright Nine by Choi Eun-young. If you enjoy the analysis of The Vegetarian, I'd really appreciate it. If you want to check out my other episodes, please use a translator. Thank you.